military-grade solution for APIs. That's my topic for today. I'm Michal Trojanowski. I'm from Curity. So now the clicker doesn't work. It's off. So the topic of API security is obviously a vast one, and there are different angles that we can look at it. You can be sometimes more concerned with maybe the infrastructure side of things, or concern yourself with the business side of things, maybe study the OWASP Tip 10 API vulnerabilities, and that's your thing. And the things I want to discuss today are some of the solutions that help you protect your access token and the flows that you use to get the access token. So first, I will talk about the sender-constrained access tokens with a brief introduction to what is mTLS, because I will need that when discussing the tokens. And then I will tell you a bit about PAR and JARM, which are two technologies used to protect the authorization code flow, so that it's harder for an attacker to steal an access token from the client. Protecting the access tokens themselves and the flows that you use to get the access tokens, in my belief, is as important as any other protection of your API. Because if someone manages to steal a legitimate access token that they can use to access your API, then you have a serious data breach, and it's as serious a breach as any other. They'll just be able to call your APIs and get all the data of your users. So let's start with answering the question, who needs secure APIs? And maybe some of you are disappointed that it's not Gary Oldman here screaming at us, everyone needs secure APIs, or hope some of you remember the reference. Anyway, just a boring old slide. But the answer is that pretty much everyone needs secure APIs. And so why military grade? That's actually a name that Travis mentioned some time ago, and I liked it, that we should use military grade APIs. Because the solutions that I will talk about today, they were popularized by an OpenID working group called Financial Grade APIs Working Group. And but these solutions are not meant only for finance. So we want people from different businesses, different parts of the industry, whether you deal with medical data or any sensitive data of your users, to be interested in this and use these technologies as they can give you better security for your APIs. In fact, the OpenID group, they changed the name to FAPI, and it's not an acronym, they just called FAPI Working Group, because they don't want to be automatically associated with finance and with the financial industry, because the solutions they work on, they're great for making your APIs more secure, whatever business you're in. So that's the bottom line here, that these solutions might help you. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, what business you represent. If you need more secure APIs, you can have a look at these. So let's quickly start with mTLS. And mTLS stands for Mutual TLS, and this is the one that you might be quite familiar with. It's got more popularity recently, also thanks to technologies like Kubernetes or service meshes, where mTLS is used it's quite popular there, and it's used to protect or to authenticate services. The communication between the services, so they know exactly what service is talking to another. But to quickly explain how it works, the usual TLS you're probably very familiar with. A client connects to a server. The server uses a certificate to not only encrypt the connection, but what is more important, or for me, in this sense, the server authenticates the connection, and now the client knows exactly which server it is talking to, whether it's the correct server that they really wanted to talk to. And in mutual TLS scenario, this works both ways. So in TLS, the server doesn't know anything about the client. It usually doesn't care about who the client is. It just allows any connection to itself. But in a mutual TLS connection, it happens both ways. So now not only the client knows who the server is, now also the server knows exactly who the client is. So both parties are authenticated with strong authentication methods, and they can both verify their identities. And these can be used in different scenarios. As I mentioned, it's used quite extensively in service meshes and in Kubernetes. But a scenario that will be interesting for us is using mTLS in sender-constrained tokens. So what are these? The majority of access tokens that we use in our APIs are bearer tokens. Bearer tokens are tokens that are not connected to any concrete client. Anyone who's in possession of that token can use it. And on the other hand, we have sender-constrained tokens. They're much less popular. We also sometimes call them proof-of-possession tokens. So these tokens are connected to only or bound to only one concrete client. Only the client that initially got the token can then use it to call the API. And we have some information in the token that help us ensure that it's only the client that can use it. So in case of bearer tokens, let's say one client gets an access token, it sends it to the API. The API only verifies the signature, the expiration date, maybe the scopes. And if that's all OK, it will send the request down to the API. And now, if another client manages to get hold of the same token, maybe it's got stolen, but maybe it's even if the other client legitimately got the token from a different client, and when it sends it to the API, again, the API only verifies the signature, the expiration date, maybe the scopes, etc., and sends the token to the API, even though it's a different client that sent it originally. If it's someone that manages to steal that token, they can call the API. As long as the token hasn't expired, they can call the API and get information. It's different in the case of proof-of-possession tokens. So when a client is issued a proof-of-possession token, they send the token to the API, but now the API verifies not only the signature and the expiration date, but also that proof of possession, so verifies whether that client was allowed to use that token, and it will send the request to the API only if the client was allowed to do it. So now if another client gets hold of the same access token, however, but sends a different proof of possession because it doesn't have the original one, the request will be rejected even though the token hasn't expired, the signature is OK, but the token doesn't belong to the first client. And it will happen the same if another client doesn't send any proof of possession. Obviously, API gateway or an API will reject such a token. There are a few different standards that allow you to use this kind of technology in your APIs. One of them is called proof of possession for JOTs. That's a standard defined in an RFC. And this one adds a CNF confirmation claim to the access token. And that claim can also contain a few different informations, but that information allows the verifier, the API or the API gateway, to check if the client that sent the token is the original one, the one that was supposed to get it. So how does it look? And here comes the mTLS I was talking about before. When the client wants to get an access token from the authorization server, it sends the authorization code, but also a proof of possession of a private key. So it, for example, uses an mTLS connection, and then the authorization server has an authentication information about the client and can use the certificate, use the mTLS connection to put that information in the access token. So then in the CNF claim, it puts information about the proof that was used. Here I'm using a KID, which might be an ID of a key used in that exchange, but it might be also a thumbprint of a certificate. There are a few different information that you can put in the token to create such a sender constraint token. And then when the client calls an API, it sends the access token, but also, again, uses the mTLS connection to the API. So when the API gateway verifies the token, it can look at the CNF claim, look at the certificate thumbprint, for example, and check whether it's the same certificate used in this mTLS connection, if it's the same as the one that the client used in the connection to the authorization server, and now knows that it is indeed the same client that was issued the access token, now sends it to the API. And if that matches, the API gateway will send the token down to the API. So let's move on to PAR. So PAR stands for Pushed Authorization Request, and this is a solution that helps you to protect your the authorization request. So the first request that starts the OAuth flow that you use to get tokens. This is a standard defined in an RFC, and it gives you a confidential and integrity protected way to start the authorization request. So how does the standard authorization request looks like? The client prepares a list of parameters and makes a GET request to the authorization server, puts the parameters in a query string, and usually that goes through a browser, or it always goes through the browser. It is just a plain GET request with a bunch of query parameters. The authorization server performs user authentication and sends back the authorization code using an HTTP redirect. There are a few problems with this. First of all, the request is not authenticated. So the authorization server has no means of verifying whether it's the legitimate client that sent the request. The client ID is a public information. Anyone can use it. Anyone can send that request. Of course, it's not as simple to just impersonate a confidential client, so one that uses a secret to exchange the authorization code for access tokens. But still, anyone can start an authorization flow, and it sometimes might be a problem and might be used to create some abuses of your API. Another thing is that the authorization server cannot verify the integrity of the parameters. It can verify the values, of course. So if someone uses a scope that they shouldn't use, the server can return an 400 response. That's not a problem, but the server cannot verify whether the parameters haven't been tampered with. And of course, the request itself, it goes through a TLS connection, so it's not that simple to exchange it on the flow, but it goes through the browser. And the browser is a hostile environment. And if someone manages to attack the browser, then they might be able to change the value of these parameters. And the authorization server can't know if these parameters are actually the ones the client wanted to use in the authorization request. And another thing is that this is just a GET request with a query string, so this might end up in the browser log. It's usually not a problem, but maybe use some parameters that you don't want to be visible in the browser log. Maybe the request gets too long, and you have very long scope names, and you use many scopes, and it just hits some URL limits. It might be a bit more obscure problem, but it can sometimes happen. So with the pushed authorization request, it adds a new endpoint to the authorization server, and now what the client does, it makes a post-request, authenticated request to that endpoint, and sends all the parameters that it would normally send in the query string. It now sends them in the body of the request. The authorization server can authenticate the client, verify all the parameters or the parameter values, saves them somewhere, and sends back a request ID to the client. And now the client uses that request ID when it starts the usual authorization request. It just uses the request ID in the URL parameter. So what does this give us is that the client is now authenticated before it makes any authorization requests to the client, to the server. The server can use any type of client authentication here, but the important thing is only authenticated client, only legitimate clients can now start an authorization flow, and no one can abuse that. The request parameters are encrypted end-to-end because it's a backend call, so it doesn't go through the browser, the PAR request. So they're encrypted during the whole flow. So now the authorization server knows that the parameters haven't been tampered with. It's safe, it's integrity protected in this sense. And URL limitations, of course, are not a problem anymore because all the parameters are sent in the body of a request. So that's not an issue. And PAR also gives us an ability to ease the restrictions on redirect URIs a bit, because normally in a standard authorization request, the server needs to verify the redirect URI, whether it's exactly the same as the client registered, because it's an unauthenticated call, right? So anyone could use it, so anyone can send any redirect URI, so the server must validate that and ensure that it only sends the authorization code back to the concrete registered redirect URI. But here, it knows that the request is authenticated, the parameters haven't been tampered with, so the restriction might be eased a little. And for example, if a client has some tenants and want to use different URLs for different tenants, or maybe different paths for the callback for some different tenants, then here the server might accept some variations of the redirect URI, even though if exactly that value wasn't registered before with the client. So JARM stands for JOT Secured Authorization Response Mode, nice and long name. Again, it's a specification. It's a specification published by the OpenID Foundation. And this one protects you from attacks against the authorization code response. So PAR protects the authorization code request, and this one protects the response. So in a standard mode, how does it work? When a client sends an authorization request, it gets back a redirect response with the authorization code and probably the state. It might be in the query string of the redirect or fragment. There's also the form post response mode, but that's not important here. And this, again, has a few problems. So the client doesn't know whether the code was issued by the server. The original server that it contacted, because it has no information who the code comes from. And it might lead to some mix-up attacks. And it's also a problem when the client uses a few different authorization servers to authenticate users and get the access tokens, because now it gets back the code, but it doesn't know which authorization server it should call to get the tokens from, actually. And also, again, someone can tamper with the parameters, because these parameters go through the browser to the client. And again, if we have a man-in-the-browser attack, someone can change the parameters, which can lead to also some attacks. So in a JOT secured response mode, what the client gets back in the redirect response is not the parameters, it's just a JOT. And then the client takes the JOT, it can decode it, verify the signature, and all the parameters, the code and the state, are inside the payload of the JOT. It also gets information about the issuer, so now it knows exactly which authorization server issued the code, and it knows that none of the parameters has been tampered with, because it's a JOT, it's integrity protected, so there's no issue with that. JARM supports all the response modes that we know from standard auth, so it can be sent in a query, in a fragment, or in a form post. And again, what does it give you? It gives us the code. Code response is integrity protected. Nobody can tamper it with the parameters. They're strongly coupled, so that mitigates some replay attacks. And it gives that protection from mix-up attacks, thanks to the information that we now know which authorization server issued the code, and we know which authorization server should be called to get the access tokens. So the key takeaways from here, remember that mTLS is your friend. Try to use it whenever you can. It's a good technology whenever you need to authenticate your services. And you can use it to to create sender-constrained access tokens. If you're concerned that your tokens might get stolen and be abused to call your APIs, then sender-constrained access tokens might be the way to go here. Give PAR and JARM a try, especially that these technologies are usually supported by the OAuth libraries that you use, and implementing them in your clients, in your applications might be very easy. It might just be turning on an option in a library to start using PAR or JARM. And don't discard any security solutions only because they're called financial or military or health. Give everything a try and have a look at everything, because all of them are usually can help to better protect your APIs. Thank you.